Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss in Internet Shitlords, and today I am doing a review of Grit and Bullets from Bozbat Games, a Wild West role-playing game. So, I've got, first of all, a programming note. If all things go as planned, on Thursday at, I believe it's 8 Central Standard Time, 8 p.m., I'm going to be guest starring on the live stream of Black Lodge Games, the YouTube channel, Black Lodge Games. And the Black Lodge people are, well, first it's ironic because they're the bad guys in Invisible College, right? The Black Lodge. So here I am going into the lair of the Black Lodge. But that's all right. I'm a magus. They can't do nothing to me. But second, they're guys that have had some very controversial takes, but some, like some of which I think they make some very good points, and some of which maybe not so much. But I like that a lot. Like Diversity and Dragons, they're a channel where they will take some kind of tough position so that that makes their videos interesting, much like I do, I guess. So that's why I'm going on there. We're gonna probably have some very interesting conversations because they're a little bit highbrow. They like to talk about some of these cerebral topics, and I think that they're very interested in the art of role playing. So we'll see how that goes. But anyways, keep an eye out on Thursday, Black Lodge Games. I'll be guest starring there. So today I'm talking about Grit and Bullets, which is an RPG. It's basically it's an OSR RPG. It's made for Microlight, which is not technically. Come on now, focus. There we go. So it's inspired by Microlight 2020, which is inspired by Microlight 20, if you're familiar with the blah, blah, blah. So this is technically, like, it's close enough that it is compatible with the OSR, right? And Grit and Bullets is meant to theoretically be realistic, though he doesn't sound very confident about that. What's this guy's name? Alexander John Hay. From Bozbat Games. Now, what am I going to say about this game? Well, first off, get the Lulu receipt out of there. First off, this game has to be like, when I talk about reviews, this game has to be looked at in the context of other Wild West games, right? I don't really have any. I've got Star Adventure up there, which is a very cool game, but not Wild West. Social Encounters, but no. But what I do compare it to are some other games that have been prominent. So most famous, I think, Aces and Eights, which was from the people that made Hackmaster. And again, not an OSR game, but a kind of adjacent one, because Hackmaster is one of the early influences on the OSR. So that game to me is like hyper realistic, right? That's also a very, very thick book. I brought these smaller books of mine here so you can compare size-wise. You can see this is not an enormously sized product. It's 84 pages. So like versus like 32 here and 20. So, or 24, whatever. So that one has like way, way more detail and, a very complex combat system and everything else. Grit and Bullets is a lot closer to typical OSR than that. In typical OSR, well, Thomas Denmark has done a Wild West game now, and he was meaning to send me one. I hope, Thomas Denmark, if you haven't done it yet, send me that Wild West game for a review, right? Because I think you said you wanted to send me one, and we will compare it to Grit and Bullets, for example. And of course, there's a few classic Wild West games, right, that are including the one TSR made. So. In any case, to me, like, I ran a very long Aces and Eights campaign, and that one was like just unbelievably great, and it was, right in that sweet spot of being realism, but just you can get it to verge onto the cinematic a little bit, Now, as far as the production of this book, you'll see it's 84 pages. It is mainly text. It has a few kind of illustrations but just very occasionally. And in terms of the structure of it, now here's the thing. It kind of ends up presuming that you are already familiar with Microlight D20. Because it just jumps in and starts with saying, well, roll your ability scores, ability bonus, armor class, fatigue, and wound points. And it says there are 3 stats, right? So this is again, here we see that this is not quite OSR, right? Because it's only got 3 ability scores: strength, dexterity, and mind. There's also some alternative method. Then you have like starting fatigue points and wound points. So if you're not familiar, the point is that looking through this, it either, like, I don't know for sure because I haven't looked at Microlight D20 in like ages, right? So I don't remember what is what, right? But this book by itself, either the problem is that it expects that you've read Microlight D20 recently, or it just has included some stuff without giving enough detail, like that might not be from Microlight D20. I don't know. So, like, for example, it gets to ancestral and ancestry and ancestral background. Is that something from Microlight D20? We don't know, but it just shows up here, and it gives some examples. It says your ancestral background should be something meaningful as well as useful. Think hard. Okay, but then it doesn't really tell you what to do with that, right? Then you have classes. So you've got, like, the cowboy. Cowboy gets is proficient with any weapon he can carry and use on a horse. +1 to strength, +1 to dexterity. But he loses the stat bonuses if his horse is killed. So okay, so he has a very smart horse. So you get some certain things here, trick riding, cowboy charm. That's okay. That's all good stuff, right? You get fighters, gunslingers, and these are all okay. They give you little abilities specific to the different types of characters. Holy man can pray for a miracle. Oh, it's Meatball. How's it going, Meatball? Everything good? Hey, you can't just sit on the. When I'm doing a review, you can't just sit on the book. What are you doing? Don't get offended at me. All right. Lawman. He's got sharp eye and keen judgment. So, there's a lot of really good stuff in this product, right? It seems very creative, but then there are some parts where I think just the writing is not ideal and it gets kind of confusing, right? So backgrounds, says each character gets 8 background points. You can distribute these as much as you like to different backgrounds as you want, up to 5 points each. You can use 2 of these 8 to add to your ancestral background for past jobs and settings. Some possible backgrounds, acrobat, alchemist, blah, 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 blah. But then it doesn't say what you do with them, right? Like, okay, so apparently according to this, in theory, I guess this is like skills in the form of just a background, right? So, like, instead of saying, well, I've got the sneak skill, I have the outlaw background. So I add that to any check that might be relevant to something I did as an outlaw. Maybe, I don't know, but it doesn't say, right? Like, that's where it gets kind of weird, right? He says there's no skills. You just tell the DM what they're doing, and the DM decides if it will succeed in the specific situation, taking into account class and background. If the DM determines a random success chance is needed, he'll call for a skill check. Okay, so there you go. Apparently, he says there are no skills, but there are skill checks. So essentially, background is substituting for skills. And it ends up effectively working out the same way, I guess. So, okay. Then you have saving throws. You have the advantage and disadvantage qualities, which are, basically like in 5e. Basic adventuring skills. So, okay, all player characters are assumed to know some of the basic things that anyone would need to know just to be alive in the Wild West, right? And then you get, into the combat rules. Now, here's the second big part, right? Like let's look at the question of what it takes to do a good Wild West RPG, right? So you can do a Wild West RPG that is very archetypal, that you have this guy is the lawman and that's all he is, which is like very reflective of movies, right? Or this guy is the sod busting farmer, or this guy is the gambler, right? And that's their one profession. And that's fine, right? That works well with the class system that you get in a typical OSR setup. The other alternative, which is actually closer to historical realism, is that you don't really have a defined class because people went around doing everything, right? Like, I mean, Wyatt Earp was at different times a pimp, a scout, he was a gambler, he was a lawman, he was an outlaw, he did all, he was a prospector, he did all kinds of stuff that, you can't define into one single class, right? So in terms of when you're designing a game saying, well, what do we want? How do we want to do it? Right. Well, the easy way if you're doing OSR is to kind of stick to the idea of the kind of classical Wild West cinematic archetypes and have classes. And that's what Grids and Bullet does. And there's no problem with that. Right. That's fine. The alternative would have to be to create some system where you have a classless OSR game. Right. The second difficult thing in the Wild West game is covering combat. Right. Because whether you're going with cinematic style combat, like from Wild West movies, or you're going into realistic combat, like the way actual, gun duels went in the Wild West, there's a lot about the D&D system that just does not work all that keenly with that, right? Like, because what you can't have is a character that has 30 hit points and a gun does a D6. And so there's no chance that a single gunshot's going to kill him, right? That is the kiss of death for any Wild West game, because the whole thing about a Wild West setup is if you're doing it realistic, absolutely for sure, it has to be that any single bullet might do nothing to you or it might kill you outright, And if you're going for a more cinematic one, well, then you can say, all right, there might be certain situations where a single bullet can't kill you, but there has to be a risk of it anyways, right? Because it has to be able to happen. So there would be various ways you could do that, right? Like you could radically reduce hit points. You could have criticals, but you have to have some kind of a setup where it's going to look quite different from your typical D&D game, and it's going to look very different even than, like, let's say how I did it in Star Adventure, right? Like where you've got essentially hit points and then con, and so, like, the point is it's quite hard to die in Star Adventure in one shot, maybe in an explosion or something like that. But in a Wild West game, you have to have that thing that if you're facing off, right, at high noon, they're down in one bullet, right? Yeah. There was the famous gunfight of, 5 dead in 50 seconds or something like that, right? Like, it's just the whole thing was going like crazy. So here, what he does is he says that in a natural 20, that would otherwise hit is a critical hit, and it does maximum damage and wound point damage equal to the number of damage dice rolled. So normally 1. Monsters don't have wound points, so critical hit will do normal damage, maximum weapon damage plus normal damage roll to them. Okay, so is that enough? I don't know. Fatigue and wound points. So he does separate fatigue and wounds. So a lot like, like hit points and con in Star Adventure, where one is a lot more dangerous than the other. Calculating damage, and he presents 2 different ways, the grittier and the simpler. Characters take all initial damage as fatigue points if there's 50% or less of fatigue points left. After that, further damage is split 50-50. Okay. Or the easier way, you just start taking damage to fatigue points till there's no more fatigue points. When either fatigue or wounds reach 0, the character is knocked down. The character can receive first aid and stand up again. Character takes more damage. Damage is added to the DC of the 1d6 roll to stand up. So if you're... I think I see what he's trying to do here, and I think it's okay. I don't know if it reflects lethality quite enough, but I guess it can depend. I mean, I can see in some games you'd have to... What you'd have to do is adjust the game to the context, right? So you can't have, if you want a game that's like totally brutal, right, then this might not be the way to go. But at least I can see here that there was like somewhat more effort than, say, in the Wretched Versus version of this. I forget which one theirs is called, but what is it? Wretched Gunslingers? I don't know. I don't remember. I'm sorry. But you know, that where it's still essentially doing things like just a D&D clone, but in the West, right? This is at least tries to think through what are you doing, right? Like, how do you work this out, right? And so this might not be the perfect game if you want to have an ultra gritty version, but it is probably good enough if you want to have one where there's a balance between that kind of gritty style and still some level of risk. Though maybe what they really should have had is some kind of like change to the critical rules to focus on, you know, what are you going to, you know, where there's some possibility of some guy, even no matter how good he is, taking one between the eyes and then, you know, just down, right? Like that's one of the geniuses of Aces and Eights was its critical rules, basically, that where you were hit, you would roll, and then that would be a kind of injury. So every hit was there's hardly any hits, you know, certainly no hits above like 3 hit points of damage that didn't also have physical consequences, descriptive physical consequences, which is, I guess, what I would do if I was going to do a Wild West game that was OSR based. I'd keep like the hit point system, but I'd have like wound locations, and the number of hit points you take in that wound will determine the severity of the damage. A lot like my critical tables in Lion and Dragon. There's also some curious rules here about creating an asset or complication as an asset. So like, again, this is not very OSR-ish. But it's kind of interesting, right? So like what it does is like the character's trying to do something where he's either going to be helping all the other members of his party in some way. So I don't know, maybe like covering fire, for example, or where he's like hindering the other side in some way, right? So that's kind of an interesting mechanic. He's got chase rules. Like there's some very interesting stuff in this book. The chase rules, I think, are in some ways easier than the ones that Aces and Eights had. And a lot of other games don't keep that in mind, right? Like in a Wild West game, the horse chases, you know, and the posse's after you. That's a pretty important one, right? Then we get to like quick draw rules, right? And this is so rarely done right. So let's see what, like here, what they say is after the initiative roll, but before the character is declared a normal action, you can do a quick draw action. Each character with a quick draw must roll for success, d20 plus dex over 15. If successfully moves to the top of the initiative list to perform a draw and shoot action. Okay, yeah. So this just takes it as kind of like getting to go first in the action, like just because he's doing quick draw. It's not like a dual mechanic like some other games have done. But maybe that's clever because the dual mechanic ones never seem to be quite right in my book, right? Like they usually don't take into account, they're either too complicated or too simple. Let's put it that way, right? Extreme damage. Some weapons are terrible extreme damage. So, okay, all right. So here we've got suggestive additional damage from like large caliber firearms or things like that, or the possibility of gear. He doesn't really go into the mechanics of it very much, but that's good. It's good that he has that there as like a suggestion. Then you have like animals and monsters. So this is, this doesn't really seem to have a specific genre focus, but so like they do have like stuff that is a couple of weird creatures in case you want to have like the Weird West type of game, including like a vampire. But it just kind of throws it in there right in the middle of nowhere, right? Like I get the feeling that the there's a little bit of flow issues with this book, right? No, here he is. He does also have a dual rule, but he puts it as an appendix. All right, well that's good. So this is only between two characters as a quick draw action. So I thought I'd seen something like this when I paged through it earlier, but the duelists agree on a specific location. At an event, they stand apart. Now it's time to hurl insults of each other. Then the draw. They each do a quick draw score. If the score is equal, it's simultaneous. And they shoot each other. Otherwise, the duel proceeds between the duelists like any other. Okay, so again, he keeps it really, really simple. But that's fine. Then he talks about armor issues, a gap in the rule. So he notes that there is armor class and therefore the opportunity for armor, but he doesn't understand the logic of armor class. So he prefers to do DR. Okay, that makes sense. Money. He doesn't bother keeping careful track of characters' money. That also can make sense in some ways. Once you hit basically the age of reason and upwards, keeping track of every last penny sometimes really doesn't work compared to like just having a kind of a general wealth class option. Weird West options, cinematic treatment. So you get some extra details, replacing D20 with playing cards, optional weird special abilities, having a powers check. So yeah, you do get like, I think that this product could have been written a little bit more coherently. It could have been explained a little bit more step by step, because it kind of just jumps in with a lot of stuff and I mean, like, I'm not asking for what is role playing sort of thing. I don't do that myself, right? But if your system is sufficiently different from OSR, and Grit and Bullets really is, like, again, it only has 3 stats apparently, even though it only mentions that once, right? You could almost just take this as a bunch of optional rules to put into an OSR framework or something too, right? So there you go. But I think that it could do a little bit of revision, a little bit more of an explanation at the beginning of exactly what the rules are about, instead of just saying, go look for Microlight D20, which most people don't know and do not play, right? So, and you'd probably be way better off, instead of saying that it was inspired by Microlight D20, to just give some of the some of the basic points in the book itself. And I know that might have made it a little bit bigger, but so what, right? But all in all, I think it's a pretty good product because it does have, all of the core elements, in one sense, similar in a way to Star Adventure, right? That Star Adventure is a complete RPG. Grit and Bullets is a complete RPG. Neither of them go into like great effort to create a setting or something like that, but they have all of the elements you need to create your own kind of to run your own kind of campaign, right? And they have sufficient variety of things like class and persona and all of that, all of the necessities of the genre, that you can then choose what setting you have for it, like what exactly type of cowboy game you want to have, or Wild West game. So, I think it's a product worth checking out, especially if you are looking for a Wild West game. It has some competition, as I mentioned, in other products, but so far, I think Grit and Bullets was a pretty good, though sometimes slightly challenging to make your way through and study through product. So bear both those facts in mind. But yeah, you might find it worthwhile. I guess that's everything for today. If you like this video, please hit the like button, share it anywhere you think people might be interested in this review. If you like my reviews, then be sure to make a point of promoting them, because reviews do tend to get a lot less views than rants or than other videos. Just because I think that's the same everywhere. It's not specific to me. It's like I've heard other people saying the same thing. But I like to do them. I like to highlight new authors or new people's new products. So I hope that if you keep promoting them by sharing them, then that'll help it out. And if you want to support me, well, check out my products. I'll put in a link to where you can get Grit and Bullets as soon as I find one. And check out my products like Star Adventure, Social Encounters, and Lion and Dragon, Sword and Caravan. Dark Albion has just become a platinum bestseller alongside Lion and Dragon. The Invisible College, the Gonzo Fantasy Companion, which is a great product, and you guys should really check it out. It's my latest product so far, though. I really hope I've got a couple of things that have been delayed at a couple of different publishers, and I'm really hoping those publishers will get them out soon, because my last new product was like in, what was that, February, I think, is when the Gonzo Fantasy Companion came out. So, but check out all my books. Check out my RPG Pundit Presents series. I've been promised by Spectre that there's a new one coming up. I really hope it'll come out soon. I know I've said that every week for quite a while now, but it should be coming out soon. And check out all my stuff, because you're going to get products that are useful for you, that you can use in your game, and you're also supporting me, and you're giving money to game designers who do not hate you, instead of to companies that do. And but also mainly share the video. And if you found the product interesting, check out Grit and Bullets by Bozbat Games. Currently smoking Nirup Poker plus Argento Roots.